Cool.
Whoa. Hi guys, today I'm going to present about my startup called Mincel, and then I'm also going to talk about Munger, which is a reading program that I am building with Mike, who's one of our book club members back in Beijing. Mincel is a Tibetan name, and it means illuminating the darkness. And I always saw language as a superpower and a tool to change the world, but also to build communication, open new doors, and get access to new souls and everything. So I came up with this name called Mincel, and I needed to get a similar equivalent in Chinese because we're targeting a lot of Chinese students with our English language program. So we came up with Mingse, Ming for tomorrow, but also for light, and Si is for Sikha, your thinking, right? So branding your thinking. And then the letters on the right is the Tibetan name, which is Minse. So our tagline is a little wiser every day. We want people to become, whatever you do, just commit yourself to learning something every day so that you become a little wiser every day. And I started this with my friend back in California who's a software engineer at Intel. Tech and the numbers, and I handled the outreach communication, and I designed the courses. And our website is www.themincel.com. A little quick intro. So the limits of my language are the limits of my world. Oh, excuse the typo here. I'm a Tibetan born in India, grew up in the United States, and there was a time in my life where I almost forgot my mother tongue, which is Tibetan. And when that happened, I almost lost connection with my grandparents and my family back in India. And I had no connection back to family or friends in Tibet. So when I was in high school, that's when I started connecting back to my roots. And I think that was when my mother took me back to a farm in India and met my grandparents. And I got in touch with my roots again. And I realized that when you lose your language, you almost lose all of your childhood, the whole memories, which happened in Tibetan language. So all that, like my own experience, and also learning new languages and the friends and the culture I've been open to, that's the entire inspiration for why I started Mincel. Because I travel so much, so Mincel had to be an online thing. So it's an online language learning platform that connects native language teachers with students, because so many of the language programs online, they don't focus so much on the culture aspect, but they just focus more on the tests and the grammar. And I wanted people to not just learn a new language for the sake of learning, but also to really understand that culture from the other person's perspective. So what we do is very little teaching, but more interaction. So far, I have 2 classes in progress in both Tibetan language, but even the way we teach is very different. So our Tibetan language is Tibetan proverb classes, or a particular local dialect. So we're learning the nomad dialect at the moment, and the other one is proverbs. And when you learn proverbs, what you're learning is, a lot of Tibetans before, they never went to school. So almost 70% of Tibetans are illiterate. So a lot of our culture knowledge is stored inside proverbs and sayings. So when we're learning these proverbs, we're learning how people 50 or 70 or 100 years ago thought and how they communicated. I have 2 more classes coming up. One is an honorific Tibetan. So Tibet was a feudal serfdom before, where power was in the hand of very few people. So what I wanted to do for the masses of Tibetans was teach them the aristocratic dialect. So one of the classes we have coming up is the aristocratic dialect courses, and the other one is a cultural courses. And then I'm going to do more of history and geography, and we also have Hindi and English, and Nick actually might be teaching a math as a language course as well on Mincel. So we have all these classes coming up. Right now we have over 100 students from 8 different countries, and a lot more courses coming up. So here are some of our courses coming up. So as I was just telling you, we had conversational, the next course is coming up for these honorific Tibetans. We're also going to do slow news in Chinese. So the 3 languages I'm focusing on are Tibetan, English, and Chinese, but I'm adding on Hindi and maybe Spanish as well. Here's our group. It's pretty small. Nick is one of our advisors, and he's going to be a lecturer as well. This is me and my co-founder, and I have two other teachers from Tibet who are native speakers of Tibetan. They're actually from the nomad area, so it's actually really fun to learn language from somebody who grew up on the pasture land, original nomads themselves, and they're teaching us from the grassland. And then Lantien is our friend at MIT who's really well connected, and he'll be giving us more advice. But he's mainly on here to help me connect with the Chinese audience. Okay, so the next thing. So I'm still in the research. We're still in the R&D phase right now. Basically, there are two ways of learning languages. One is the whole memorizing and grammar, the way I learned Chinese, basically. And then there's a natural way of learning, how the way you learned your mother tongue with your parents, right? And so I looked at the problem of what's happening with the language learning around the world. There's a huge, when you look at like Duolingo, even when you look at Rosetta Stones, they're doing good with teaching you language and retaining information, but they're not teaching you culture. This is something that I didn't learn in most of my language courses when I learned French or Spanish or Chinese. So the interest is big, but the old method is not working. So what we're doing is we are online to give the real class experience. But our lectures are actually only 5 minutes a week. So we do 2 5-minute lectures a week, but we spend about an hour to 2 spending time on discussion. So there's this new concept called the flip side learning. Have you guys heard of the flip side?
Mm-hmm. Nope.
So flip side is where, yeah, it's a flip classroom. So what we do is we don't explain our lectures. So the teachers would send the lectures, which is only 5 minutes each. There's 2 5-minute lectures a week. Students watch them, they learn them, and they come online for our live discussions, and then we just discuss them. So they do all the homework before coming to class, and we don't teach them, but then they learn on their own. And we want them to speak more and to be able to listen more, actually. And there's another method that I have and I'm going to use, but I didn't include it on here yet. So that's just on the problem and opportunity. 3 products. The website is where video, live chat, speaking practice, slow news. For the apps, we're gonna create games and quizzes and reading, and also writing. So the Tibetan characters you can actually write on the screen. So we have these writing apps online for the characters, and it's also a good way to practice your Chinese characters on there as well. And then you'll have more listening. I'm trying to get all 5 senses when they're learning the language, but also doing reading, writing, speaking, and learning all at the same time. And for the podcast, I'll do a lot of these interviews with people from each culture. So let's say if it's a Chinese, I'll probably find some interesting professors or some Chinese people from different areas and fields, and I'll have podcasts and interviews with them so our students can have more learning experience from the native speakers' perspectives. Next slide. So our USB is, it should be fun, it should be easy, it's affordable. Right now we've made it all free, but we're only charging about $9.99, $9, like, okay, $10 a month. It's accessible, it's interesting, content rich, practical, and I'm very picky about who I hire as teachers, and then the culture aspect and wisdom. So we don't just teach language, but we're teaching culture. We're teaching how to think in that person's culture, how to speak like them. We're even teaching etiquettes, like how do Tibetans carry their, the Tibetan body language, the Chinese body language. We're focusing on the writing. We're also even focusing on behavior, because people behave differently, right? We're focusing on listening and reading, and then the whole Buddhism perspective of patience, love, empathy, and kindness. let me see the next slide. Marketing strategy, we're still figuring it out. I haven't actually gotten a good person on the marketing yet. Right now, it's all word of mouth, digital platforms. I have about 5,000 friends on Facebook, so that's been really helpful. So some of my promo videos have gotten about 20,000 hits. So that's been really helpful. Our target audience are for the Tibetan language, Tibetans in the West, students of Tibetan studies at the universities across America and Europe. For the for the English language, there are about 250 million Chinese students learning English. So, but from the 250 million, I'm particularly focusing on ethnic minorities in Western China. So I have about 500 ethnic minority students from Western China right now, and I'm teaching them for free. And then for the Chinese language, we are particularly focusing on I'm looking at American students in the West learning Chinese. And I think around in Europe and America together right now, there are about 750,000 people learning Chinese language. So this is a really cool market. For many of them, there isn't a very good program yet. So I'm trying to see how I could link up with them, and I'm going to be reaching out my old universities and other universities across East Coast and West Coast. And then Spanish is another huge interest. Not quite sure how to go about this right now in China. And then there are quite a few who want to learn Hindi. So I'm setting up a Hindi course online. How I've been positioning Mincel is language is a ticket to being able to participate in the culture of the people who speak them by the virtue of the fact that it is their code, so there is no other way. And we are presenting language as, like I said before, as a superpower, as a tool, as a way to connect with other people. So that's what we're doing at Mincel. And through language learning, what I'm really encouraging is lifelong learning. You know, whatever you do, just learn something every day. Gain a new advantage tool, or learn a new way of thinking. And somebody who really inspired me was this woman called Lera Borotsky. She's a Russian psychologist who's a professor at UC San Diego, and she had this really cool research about how the language we speak shapes the way we think. And I applied it to myself. So I grew up in a Tibetan family that only spoke aristocratic dialect, the honorific Tibetan. So I never misbehaved in Tibetan. So when I was a teenager in America, I would always misbehave in English. Like if I ever spoke back to my parents, it would never come out in Tibetan because I never knew how to say bad words in Tibetan. But obviously in English, I had no problem speaking back to my parents. And I realized how whenever I spoke Tibetan, I sounded like this perfect daughter. Because for me, Tibetan language is so like Latin with, esteem, and I held so much respect for it. So even when I speak Tibetan, like my body and everything becomes so much more subservient. And then when I spoke in English, I'm so much more dominant, independent and thinking. And I wanted to explore this research and apply to the different languages. And so she was one of my inspirations. The other one is Charlie Munger, about becoming a little wiser every day, develop yourself into a lifelong learner, cultivating curiosity and becoming a little wiser every day. So now I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and then I have some other stuff I want to share really quickly. You guys can still hear me, right?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So I found, so here are 3 questions that I'm asking at Mincel, and I think this is helpful for all of you to ask about your project as well. What can we be best at in the world at? And then passionate about, and what is the key economic indicator we should concentrate on? So at Mincel, what we can be best at is teaching language and helping people become passionate, or to help them think differently in other languages. I don't think a lot of programs are doing that. we're passionate about self-learning, and the key economic indicator is something that I'm still researching. I recently came across this Russian CIA who developed a method called, so this guy's name is Zamyakin, and his method is actually, it's quite neat, and that's how he taught himself language within like 6 months to a year. And I'm going to try this with my students from next month. So what he did is he would listen to, so even with like zero understanding or knowledge of any language, let's say English, he would listen to an audio about 1 minute length for about 3 hours every day for 2 weeks. What he would do is he would listen to the recording, but also look at the printed text, and this is what he called reconciliation. And then after listening to the audio for 2 weeks or 3 hours every day, and then reading the script, then he would read the text out loud and copying the intonation, pronunciation, and basically he could read just by the mere fact that he was listening to that audio for 2 weeks. So I haven't tried it. This is called the Zamyakin method. And I'm going to try this with my 500 students next month to see how far I get. A lot of them have like a really low or poor English level. They probably know alphabet, but beyond that, they don't know. And I'm going to start with some dialogue from Pixar movies. Like I'm going to start with Finding Nemo or Shrek or something. I'm going to pick some really simple and short dialogues and try this method with them. The other thing, what I'm doing in China right now is that we are building this reading program called Munger, and it was inspired by Charlie Munger. So what's happening with a lot of people is that people are able to read. So a lot of students I work with, they're able to read, they're able to sound out words, but they can't explain what it means. So if I give them 2 newspapers and I'll ask them to read, they'll read it. But if I ask them to explain it back to me, they're not able to do it. They're not able to explain it back to me. Now, if I give them 2 articles and ask them to compare and contrast and tell me the differences, they're also not able to do it. So we are looking at this Munger program, which is going to try to solve the functionality illiteracy program, where students can read, but they can't understand. So that's what I'm doing with them. And what we'll be doing is we'll give them passages and we'll have them summarize and retell it and develop activities and exercise where people can explain what they are learning, and then we'll think of how at the same time engage all 5 senses, because I think that's really important for students to feel it and see it and think it, and also maybe even smell and visualize and all that stuff, which they're not able to do. So yeah, so these are the 2 things I'm working on at the moment. It still needs to be refined more. That's why I've been traveling a lot, looking at meeting these students in person. I just got back from Nepal. I was with a bunch of nuns. They're really young, from the ages of 5 to 16. They're all in a direct instruction setting environment, right? So and the problem with these schools is that there's this huge hierarchy between the teachers and students, and it's also a religious institution which is trying to teach this modern education. And I'm trying to encourage more constructivist pedagogy, and this is where I got the flipped classroom idea. And then I'm also trying to encourage more teacher and students. At these schools, like teachers and students are so segregated. Like there's this huge distance between them. And I'm trying to bring that closer, even encouraging maybe teachers and students should eat together. And I noticed that students eat on the floor and the teachers eat on the tables, and then it doesn't make sense to me at all. And there's very little questioning back to the teachers. So trying to encourage less of these direct instruction and more constructivist teaching at the schools. Jonathan and I are going to visit another school in India next week, and Jonathan, you also see what's wrong with the system here as well, and how we could intervene, sort of like seamlessly intervene without without calling them out. Minsel and Munger for today. Yeah. I mean, for now, like, I'll just stop here and I'll take question and answers. And there's one more thing. Maybe some of you might know more about it. I'm interested in the metacognitive method. So metacognition is it's where between what student believes he knows and what the student actually he knows. So when I talk to a lot of the students, they all know it, but they can't explain it. And I can't really understand whether they believe they know it, but they don't know it, or how much they actually know it if they can't explain it. So this is an idea that I'm exploring at the moment. It's called metacognition and how to improve the skills, particularly for students in low socioeconomic statuses. And then in the language program, one of the things that I am quite passionate about is, particularly given my situation, is how do I get these second generation Tibetans either in Europe or in North America not assimilate? A lot of them don't speak Tibetan anymore. So no, it was quite like scary for me. I went to Sweden, then I went to Zurich. And then, well, when I was in the States last time, I keep meeting so many of my peers and friends who have forgotten Tibetan, can no longer connect back to their roots. And with that being political, I'm wondering, like, how do we actually, it's not just for Tibetans, it's for anybody how do you encourage integration without assimilation? Yeah, so that's another thing that Munsel will try to tackle. Yeah. Yeah, I'll stop here, you guys. So feel free to ask me questions. They are from, the youngest is high school, so about 17 to 50. So for younger ages, I've been thinking, because a lot of parents have reached out to me, I've been thinking about, for younger ages, I would literally have to make maybe 25 students, take them on a Skype group, and I would have to have the parents chaperone them online. And I would probably do classes like that, but it would have to be more like micromanaging and have a smaller class session. And I would need the parents to sit next to the 2, 3-year-old, 4-year-old kid. Because otherwise it would be impossible for me to, get them to like sit across the computer on Skype. Well, Sesame Street did a lot of good things in terms of getting lower socioeconomic status in the United States to get the kids to read and actually, right? I mean, like, I don't know the full research on it, but I know there's a research on how Sesame Street has actually helped kids from lower income families improve reading. So one of the things I thought about for Tibetan language was creating this cartoon or some kind of a TV show that teaches them on Tibetan history. And Tenzin and I talked about this before, about teaching geography and culture and how to speak to your parents and the culture nuances in a movie. So we've had that. We've also talked about maybe writing a book for the little kids. But the programs that I have right now are focused 17 to 50. Yeah, so high school to 50-year-old. Yeah. Oh, Nick wrote something. Roman Italy. Natural language method. That's right. Yeah. So Nick, exactly. So I think learning I think this is what holds I can't pronounce this guy's name, but Zamyakin's method is very similar to what you're saying. It's learning by total immersion, but first honing on your listening skills. And learning language, listening and reading, yeah. So yeah, like what Nick is talking about touches on the Feynman technique, right? So the Feynman technique says the best way to learn anything is pick a topic and then pretend like you're teaching it to somebody or to an empty classroom. And when you get stuck, go back to the books. And then the fourth step is you try to connect what you learned with the old ideas by using analogies and examples so it sticks. And if you could apply that for everything you learn, even if it's just one word or one passage, he's saying that's one of the best ways of learning it. So I haven't applied these to language yet, but I'm going to try with this Russian guy's technique and see how far I get. And for also for the language learning, what I did this weekend was instead of the teacher leading the discussion, I had the students just start speaking and try to teach it back to us. And that really got the discussion going from an hour to 2. So it was just quite fun. When you invite them to teach or when you invite them to lead, that actually inspires more, increases more participation. So that was quite fun on WeChat. And like I've noticed that with language, speaking seems to be the most challenging thing for everybody. Like when I talk to, even amongst us, I think our reading and writing Chinese is better than speaking. Even with my students, people who could, so there are students now at the end of 1 month, they can understand this nomad dialect, but people still can't speak it. So I'd be interested if you guys know how to improve speaking and tongue exercises and how to strengthen that tongue muscle. So what I've done with what I did with the public speaking classes is I gave the students certificate, plus I gave them about 1,000 yuan for whoever took the first place in public speaking. So unfortunately, it's been like a monetary incentive. That's what we've been doing for the other classes. But for this class, the one that I'm leading right now, no one's really looking at accreditation, but everyone is, it's more like what you hope for or what you like, which is intrinsic incentive, right? So everybody in the nomad dialect class we're at right now, like everybody wants to do it because they want to connect with the nomads. This one, it really depends on which class we're doing. For some classes, they want accreditation, but for some classes, it's all totally like intrinsic incentive driven, so they don't really care about accreditation. But what we're doing is we actually, whoever completes all the homework, participate in all the discussion, anyone with over 80% gets a certificate at the end of the course. They have to listen to the lectures, they have to attend all the discussions, and if they have 80% participation and grades, they get a certificate. Yeah. So it's pretty hard. The most online language, I think, is 60%. So we made it 80%, which is quite high. Yes, so we haven't even thought about the accreditation at all, because right now I feel that so when students finish a course, they tell me, wow, you've added so much value to the way I think. So for them, that itself is an accreditation, intangible one. So that's what they say. So we haven't thought about a accreditation or something tangible yet. But I mean, if we were to do it, I would probably do it for the English language. So certain language, I don't think you need it because it's just not relevant. Like Tibetan accreditation is just not relevant at the moment. But for English, we might do it. We're going to do it for particularly kids in India, because if my program can be recognized by some Indian Ministry of Education, then maybe we might be an institution that can actually give a 10th grade student a passage on, like, her English level is good enough to go to the A levels or something. Very long term, but at the moment we've not considered it. I don't know if this link. I mean, if eventually, like, we could be, eventually I'm thinking, really, okay, not if, right? When Minsal becomes big, I could actually be one of those, like, institution or organizations that could create like a HSK level of accreditation or certification in Tibetan. And in that way, he could probably use it. Can he use it then, maybe? If I have that. Yeah, so I mean, how Dana could use this program, this is something, like, Dana, could you explain a bit, maybe? Okay, well, you can type if you can't speak. Where is Jaguar? Yeah. And it's still developing. So I just met my first investor, so I'm gonna get the money this month, and I think from there it's going to quite pick up, and it'll be interesting to see where this goes. Yeah, but Dana, I think you're right. So yeah, I really don't know how this would interact with the system that the one he's seeking. But what I could say on the basis of accreditation is that if when Minsel class gets really refined and developed, I definitely see Minsal as being an organization that could develop something like a HSK or an accreditation, a certification program, which we don't have right now at the moment in Tibetan language. So what you're saying, yeah. No. What you're saying is actually exactly what this article is making a point about, right? So he's saying that based on the United States National Assessment of Adult Literacy, 95% of people have failed when they're asked to compare two newspaper editorials with different interpretations of scientific methods or evidence. So what you're saying is what he's suggesting. So what happened in the state of Massachusetts is that in 1990s, they started writing exams based on, like, cater to what the students are studying at that moment. So let's say if there's a kid studying on New Zealand, that person should be tested on New Zealand to pass that person's reading level test, not some random passage about spiders or Titanic. So states in the US like Massachusetts and Louisiana has done that. And it's exactly what you're saying you need. If more states pick this up, what you're saying is exactly they're heading in the right direction based on what they know, so that you're not being randomly tested on some subjects, to make sure you pass and you get into the school. I know, but you test people on test skills, right? Like, I think so. Okay, so my spoken Tibetan is really good, right? Incredibly good. But my reading and writing is incredibly poor. It's probably like first grade. So I think there should be a way you're testing spoken and written and writing and testing someone's reading skills. And I think that's the point that I'm trying to get to, is that a lot of these tests that I've taken, they're like, even LSAT, they're just testing you based on your test taking skills rather than your knowledge or your actual level. The right idea. I think the right idea here might be to think of my system as a way to facilitate a waterfall effect traveling out from systems like this one and others. Existing education system. Sorry? I do, yeah. I've got to call it something. It could similar colonize and amplify one like this. The thing is, that's very good for highly motivated students who want to act outside of available education and get accreditation for themselves. Yeah, that's so what Dana is saying is a really good point. So far, all the students I have, Jonathan, which you would love, is they're all like intrinsically like, they're all driven by intrinsic incentive, not extrinsic at the moment. So no one's even talking about accreditation. But I know when we go big, I will have to consider all these factors. How do I accredit somebody for their language skills? Exactly. So, like, Dana, if you think about it, I'll have students from the grassland, nomad kids who cannot even go to school. But then for my online program, so I've got a kid participating from a grassland, right? And he probably won't be able to afford or go to schools. But because of his WeChat and his phone and some data plan, he's able to access this language. And he's actually able to have TAs from Harvard, because I only hire Harvard for my English TAs. So, and for them, it's such a privilege and an honor to be learning, for some nomad kid to be learning with the Harvard undergrad. Yeah. So I think Dana's like the mothership, and then we're all like, all these programs will function under his mothership. That's how I see it, if I'm understanding correctly. It's one word. A bit big. No, a lot more than that. Jonathan, what I'm really encouraging here is how to think, differently in other languages. And that's what I'm really trying to solve here. Because how do I learn Hebrew and think like a Jewish and become like a Jewish man, And how do I don't know, how do I speak like Indians and then have this very laid back attitude? How do I think? That's what I'm really trying to get my students to do. And so I have Italian and Russian students learning Tibetan with me, and I'm trying to get them to think and behave and act like Tibetan in that language, but without assimilating them, but helping them integrate. That's what I'm really doing. Actually, no, but Jonathan, like I think about at the end of the third year in Beijing, I had so many Chinese friends and I'm still in touch with them. And what they told me before I left is that they said, you've become like one of us. Like you've changed so much in the 3 years you've been here, even the way you speak and the way you act around us, right? And this is how I have been able to cultivate this relationship with them. They treat me like a family now, and which would never happen before. And even when I think about like this Lantian guy at MIT right now. The first day we met, we had a pretty much like this heated debate about China and Tibet, and today we're like brother sisters. And it's been really interesting how like language has transformed the way I had thought, and how I understand them from their perspective now, and how I've learned to massage my messages around them and how I frame things, and which I would never know how to talk to a Chinese had I not gone to Beijing. You can actually measure it. You can actually like how much you have changed when you can even ask your Chinese students how much you've changed over the years. We're gonna be happy to students. Ideally, they would even begin teaching others who are not even enrolled with the help of their students. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. All right, so I gotta go, guys. I'm happy to take more questions or emails. I have another meeting right now. Yeah. Thanks all for joining. Thank you all.